Welcome to our discussion of sexual coercion. This chapter is not an easy chapter to go through, and it's important that if you don't feel comfortable with these topics, that you confine yourself to reading the textbook or something else. The subject matter is not appropriate for children, that's for sure. So if you have stumbled upon this video and you do not belong in my class, you probably shouldn't be listening to this video or watching it. However, I have this picture that I've placed on this first slide because this is an issue that has been part of humanity for a really long time. It's not just rape. We're going to be talking about other kinds of sexual coercion, but it's really important to recall that these are big basic issues. They have affected a lot of people. A lot of times the reason why people get very upset while they listen to these kinds of topics is because they feel like other people somehow know that this topic really applies to them, and they feel like uncomfortable because of that. I just want everybody who's listening to know that this does affect a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And so hopefully that makes you feel a little bit more willing to hear the research and things on this subject, because it is so relevant to so many different people. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive in with rape, and we're going to start with the definitions. This word is used to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I'm going to start with how it was legally defined as far as the crime of rape prior to 1970. So let's look at this definition. The unlawful compelling of a woman through physical force or duress to have sexual intercourse. Okay, so that's awfully specific because the only victim can be female, right? And hopefully you guys are aware that males can be raped also. So before 1970, that wasn't acknowledged. The unlawful compelling. I think you'd have to be a lawyer to know exactly what constitutes unlawful compelling, right? They say through physical force or duress. Duress is a pretty specific word. A lot of times people will use the word duress when what they mean is they felt guilty. And so they felt pressured, like socially pressured. Duress is more like fear of harm. It's something bigger than just sort of feeling guilty or feeling like they'll look foolish or something like that. And then finally we have the word sexual intercourse. And of course, that's a euphemism, isn't it? I think they probably meant coitus, but they didn't say coitus, did they? And so what do you mean by sexual intercourse? All right, so we're not happy with the before 1970 definition, that's for sure. So how about through the 70s and 80s? They simplified it a little bit and they expanded it through this simplification. Any act of sexual intercourse, okay, that's still kind of vague, that is forced upon a person. Okay, so now we got rid of it can only be a woman, so that's a step forward. We have gotten rid of the unlawful compelling and instead just focused in on force. But again, they're not super clear about whether it's physical force or it's cajoling, right? Needling, something like that. It's not really clear. And then, of course, we've left out, any more specificity on what you mean by any act of sexual intercourse. Any act of sexual intercourse. Okay, so that at least has broadened it out from maybe we accidentally just meant to say coitus. Now we clearly are meaning more behaviors, but what? What other behaviors? All right, so in the 80s, the definition was simplified even more. Non-consensual sex acts. Okay, that's pretty good. Any sex act that is performed without the consent of the other person. Okay. The FBI until 2012, though, the federal definition of this crime was the carnal knowledge of a female, forcibly and against her will. Until 2012, that was the definition that the FBI followed. So one of the things that was always perplexing is if you looked at sort of the different localities and their reporting of non-consensual sex acts as they were defining it in the localities, you would get this large number of rape statistics, large number of occurrences, and then you'd look at the federal rolls, and you're like, why is this so much lower? Well, first off, at the FBI, they were only counting these attacks on women. They weren't looking at any male victims. The carnal knowledge, what? Not sure what that means. So that probably left out some things. And then forcibly and against her will leaves, some ambiguity as far as, whether this was actually a legal thing or not, right? So the FBI fixed it from 2012 on. Now, see, the FBI went the opposite direction of other people. It got longer. So now it is penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. Okay, so I don't think we have to wonder what they mean by sex acts anymore, do we? So pretty much anything involving sexual organs and any kind of orifice, and then any kind of orifice with an object or any body part. It doesn't have to be a sexual part, right? So, okay, so that's pretty darn specific. You'll notice they got rid of the female part. So now it's just a victim. And it could be any other person. So it doesn't imply that the perpetrator has to be one sex and the victim has to be a different sex. It's one person doing this very specific list of acts without the consent of the other person. All right, so we have definitely gotten a lot more specific over time. Now, one of the things that can be really confusing is that each of the states uses a different word for what they mean when they talk about it in their local press and stuff. So some states call it rape, some states call it sexual assault, and that can be a little bit confusing because sexual assault has that word assault that involves, in any other context without the word sexual in front of it, would involve some kind of, physical beating or something, that involves, pain and things like that. And what we're going to find out as we go on is that not all rapes involve a physical abuse type of, like punching or anything. You don't have to have that be part of rape, right? And so in some states, it seems like what they're talking about is different from what other states are talking about when they say rape. But really, they're all the same thing. It's just sort of, I think sexual assault is a euphemism that makes some people feel like they're not really having to say the word rape, even though they really are basically synonymous. All right. So there are different categories of rape. And that was what I was kind of alluding to in that last little stammering thing I was doing. So first off, there's the stranger rape, where the victim does not know their attacker. This is going to be performed in lots of different ways and ways that they describe them. The blitz sexual assault is where the victim has no idea that this person is even there, so that maybe they jump out of the bushes and grab the victim, or they sort of grab them or knock them down or somehow just like out of nowhere. And that surprise is critical to the ability to actually conduct the sexual assault. The home invasion is what it sounds like, right? Where they invade your place where you feel the safest. And, so you have not only the sexual assault component, but also that lack of security component that goes along with having your own home invaded. And then there's the contact sexual assault. And this is where a stranger has contact with the victim somehow. Could be that they bumped into each other at the grocery store, or that the rapist sort of is looking for a person with particular characteristics. You see this with serial rapists. A lot of times you'll see that they're looking for a victim with certain hair color, or who engages in a certain profession or something like that. And so they don't know each other, but the attacker has had some kind of contact, and that meant something to the attacker. And then the attacker follows up, either follows the person home or out to the parking lot or something like that. Acquaintance rape, we used to, when I was in college, it was called date rape, but that they realized was a misnomer because you weren't necessarily on a date with your acquaintance. So it's somebody who you know. It is a big umbrella that includes marital or spousal or partner rape, and it also includes incest. So when the when the attacker is known at all, then it falls under acquaintance rape. And then, of course, acquaintances can do different kinds of attacks on their victim. So the battering rape is the one I was kind of alluding to earlier, where I was saying, sexual assault implies that sort of battering, but it's not always. Not all rapes include battering. Battering is where there's going to be that physical violence as well as the sexual violence. When we have the force-only rape, it's going to be a person who's forcing their victim to comply through imposition of power, and that power could be exerted physically, like being able to be strong enough to hold the person down or to hold their hands together with one hand or something like that. So it could be that kind of like physical power, or it could be power over the other person, using sort of psychological power. I know stuff about you, or I could tell somebody else and you need to comply, or else I'm going to, reveal your secrets, those kinds of things. It could be that kind of power also. Obsessive sadistic rape is where the person is going to engage in more than just the sexual rape. They're going to also do extra stuff, torture, perverse sexual acts. So not typical sex acts, but other things that are like demoralizing or degrading or something like that. So when we talk about rape, we're talking about 80% being acquaintance rape. About 80% of the time, the victim knows their assailant. And a lot of times in these situations, the victim not only knows them, but they trust them. They thought that this was a safe person. And so you can imagine if you're the victim of an acquaintance rape, you may have this overwhelming feeling that you can't even trust yourself at all. You can't be, I thought I was a decent judge of character, and then this happened. So it's not only what happens to the person physically, but it also is what happens to them mentally afterwards that makes acquaintance rape really super damaging. And there's another layer of acquaintance rape where the victim may feel a certain amount of culpability that is probably misplaced, but they may feel to themselves like, well, maybe I did something that brought this on, right? Like maybe it's somehow my fault. And those kinds of second guessing and things can cause them not to want to report. It can cause them to become depressed or anxious. And so acquaintance rapes in a lot of ways, because they're the less likely to be reported types, they don't get the support from, we have whole systems in place for supporting victims. And if you don't report, then you don't get that support. And whereas with stranger rape, a lot of times you have a very clear victim who everybody wants to help. But with an acquaintance rape, there's, people saying, well, what were you doing there anyway? Or other undermining things that make it much more complex for the person to recover in the face of that. So I thought I'd share with you this little video that one of my students turned me on to last winter. And it's a pretty good comparison of consent based on whether you say, yes, you want some tea or not. So this will pop up next in the playlist, and I will see you on the other side.